Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.
Hi, welcome to Overtime. So with Dr. Michael Jacobs, I'm Chip Franklin. It's interesting for me to look at all these injuries, and you were talking about velocity and how velocity is the name of the game, and there's so many pitchers that are getting hurt with this. But how do you fix that now? The hitters are also strong and so talented. I mean, you're not going to go back and bring in a Mike Bordick or Jamie Moyer who throw 90, or could you? Could a pitcher who could change speeds and nibble a Maddox type? Could they still play in this game? And if not, are we going to have to create like super Android arms?
Well, I go back to seeing things in a big picture. That's a social problem, as we've discussed briefly, where when we were kids in the 60s, everybody played all sports and you rested yourself. And now
Right.
you've got, 12-year-old kids just play baseball, lacrosse. They're super specialized. They play 24/7. You've got travel baseball teams going to Florida over Christmas with 12-year-olds. So you can't stop what parents do to their young children. I think that MLB can solve this very simply. And if you've ever heard Jim Palmer or Smoltz talk, Palmer, I know personally, of course, they talk about how they were trained all through their careers to pace themselves, to go 7 innings, to save 1 or 2 pitches for when they need it, to set players up, to not show pitches early in the game for later. But now that the new mantra is throw as hard as you can for 4 innings and we'll get a new guy, you can't do that. So if Major League Baseball wants to fix it, that's easy. They just need to drop the number of pitchers you allow Major League staffs to have. Right now, I think it's 12. And if they just said you could only have 11 pitchers, then you'd have to give them 2 or 3 years to regroom their minor leagues and make sure their starting pitchers start going 6 or 7 innings, because they can't bring in that many relievers. And then you also have to adjust the little game everybody plays. And I got to admit, Buck and Dan Duquette were maestros at getting guys up and down with options, as they like to say, flipping guys up and down from the minor leagues. But if you limit the number of flips you can make and limit the number of pitchers on your staff, then you'll have to retrain your pitching staff to go more innings. And I'm not sure why they don't do that, but that's what they have to do. And similarly, maybe all of these velocity farms that are working on pure power will start also working on other pitches to get a more complementary array of pitches for younger pitchers so they can go more innings. But in the absence of that, it's not going to change. Believe me, Jamie, who's a great person we had and loved, and of course is married to Digger Phelps' daughter, as everybody knows, I don't think he could throw 90 at the end of his career. I think that was a bit of a reach. And I always wonder if a guy like Maddox would even get drafted. Now, I was talking to Buck Showalter once, and he said that early in his career, Maddox did actually throw pretty hard. And that during the course of his career, for whatever reason, he adjusted how he pitched. But he at one time, maybe threw hard enough to get somebody's attention. But we'll see how the young man from Japan throws for us. I mean, he is basically an off-speed pitcher. He's a change of pace pitcher. And I personally think they will be highly successful in a league where everybody else throws real hard. I think throwing in somebody else who has different timing on your players and who will throw you off-speed pitches and fastball counts will be very effective, particularly against everybody else who throws basically off 94 plus.
Well, it used to be that was the old saying: up and in, low and away, and don't let them know which way you're going. And obviously, at every level, though, managers want to win. So in college, right? I mean, they're not going to be thinking, how can I preserve this arm for his major league career? I mean, they want to win. They want to win in the SEC or whatever division they're in. They want to move forward. And, if you got a guy that can throw 98, 99, do you really want him throwing in, a 92 mile an hour slider that he might hang over the plate, right? If he can throw a ball with movement in the mid 90s, that's what they're going to do. So, I mean, I don't know the answer here. I just think that there are, I know that hitters, the few that I know personally that I've spoken to, they hate the guys that throw those softballs that are just off the plate. It really frustrates them because they want to drive the ball. I mean, there's Tony Gwynn's and stuff will take whatever you throw and knock it into the outfield for a base hit. But a lot of these guys they're they're living on power numbers, and they want to see, heat right down the middle. I mean, although that's changed too now. I mean, with the advent of, the cut fastball and the ability to throw a two-seamer at near the same speed they used to throw four-seamers, and the movement on that. That's what I want. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about too is.
Well, let me interrupt on that. First of all, certainly, since we weren't Atlanta Braves people, and I went through the playoffs with Glavin and
Greg,
getting a little bit of a bigger plate. Presumably, with the advent of these robot umpires who will be able to correct some of these off the plate strikes, that will have some effect on everybody, particularly some of those nibbler kind of pitchers. And I also think it's an unwritten rule that you can't criticize people in the media, but I think everybody thinks that college coaches are deadly for pitchers because they get paid for wins. They don't get paid for how many major leaguers they make. And they do burn out their pitchers. If you go look at the record, Ben McDonald at LSU virtually pitched both ends of a doubleheader in the World Series. He pitched the first game, and then he came in to relieve in the second game. And I remember watching the two studs from Vanderbilt pitch in the World Series. And by the World Series, they were basically just throwing sliders. So it made me think their fastballs had kind of burnt out. So you're right that college coaches are there to win games, not to make major leaguers. So, and if you look at how many of I remember when I saw Mize, I saw he threw a splitter, and I was sure his elbow was going to go. You see the guy the Mets passed on who the Rangers took early, and he went down. A Leiter has been struggling, and I think similarly the GMs, based on all these injuries and based on the way the Orioles draft, are incredibly afraid to draft high school pitchers,
right?
Because of the injury rate. So that is a real issue of, do you draft pitchers in high school? Do you draft pitchers from college? Or do you do what the Orioles have done, which is draft hitters which they feel more comfortable predicting and then use them to trade for pitchers who at least have a track record? I think right now that's the new approach.
Well, we were talking about protecting, the Buster Posey rule, with the catchers now, so you can't collide and create a, Pete Rose, Ray Fosse collision at the plate, right? Which didn't end his career, but it didn't help it. That's for sure.
It pretty much ended his career.
Yeah. And, it's funny though. He did have a couple good seasons after that. I looked that up when I heard everybody talking about that. He actually did have a couple seasons after that. But to that point, I mean, there's so many ways for somebody to get hurt on a baseball field. It is, people don't understand how physical the game is and the speed and at the major league level, everything. We're talking about the velocity of the pitches, of course. But what if you made the strike zone smaller? What if you went even smaller than it already is? I mean, when I was a kid, it was knees and letters, right? And now I don't know what it is, belt and, at the bottom of the letters, it's really small. I don't know if you could make it small. With the robotic umpires, is there any way technology can reduce the number of injuries to the arm? And then when you look around the infield, the second part of this is, what position other than pitcher invites the most injuries, do you think?
First of all, to address one thing you said, I think they don't go to robotic umpires, which clearly has to be done. I assume there's pushback from the umpires themselves who want to feel important. However, there's nothing more frustrating than a strike zone that shifts in the ninth inning because somebody doesn't want to call a strike three to end a game or whatever.
Right.
But I think once they get the robotic umpires and they call a legitimate strike zone, you don't need to shrink it. I think that the problem is it just kind of floats today. Number two, we can always go back to 1968 when they lowered the mound because of, Koufax, Marichal, and Gibson being unhittable. I mean, if you want to help pitchers a bit, you could raise the mound because all pitchers, and Kevin Brown used to say this to me, he'd say, Doc, it's a high-low game. You got to go from high to low. And if you raise the mound again a couple inches, you make it easier for pitchers to throw downhill, and that would probably make it easier for them to not injure their arms. So I really think that that is the other option they have. To me, it's
That
cut
was the
down
year, wasn't that the year Gibson had that tremendous ERA, 68?
1.14, but actually, I think he only won like 15 games
Yeah.
because he lost like 12 games where his team either got shut out or only scored one run. The
And
amazing thing
didn't
about that,
Yastrzemski's Triple Crown year, I think that was 67, maybe it was 68. He
67.
only hit 301. So the averages were
67.
down.
It was 67. The amazing thing about Gibson's year, and I'm sure this has never happened in the modern age, is he was never removed from a game during an inning.
You know why? The
They were
manager was
afraid to
afraid
come
of
out
him.
and say to him, "You're coming out."
Yeah.
That's probably why. That's the famous line of when McCarver came out to talk to him. Halfway up, he said, "Go on back." He said, "The only thing you know about pitching is you can't hit it." Okay.
Yeah. Didn't Earl and Palmer have a few moments like that too on the mound?
According to Jimmy, he's told me a couple times late in games when Palmer was gassed and he was struggling a bit, Palmer would come out, or Earl would come out and point to the bullpen and say, "Do you want those guys to be responsible for your win, or do you want to finish this?"
All right, so let me
And,
ask you this.
and have Jimmy finish it.
Let me ask you this last question. Back in the day when a player got older, especially catchers, but they still had a good bat, they'd put him at first, thinking that kind of protected him, right, physically. But first base now is a much more physical position than it was 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean, they're expected to do more things, have strong arms, be able to field, to their right. And that's, if you have a left-hander, that's a little bit easier. If you have a right-hander, ball's hit, it's got to spin off the right-handed hitter's bat. So a lot about that. But I was thinking about this, with Westberg's injury at third base for your back, that's a tough position on your back because you're down like that. And Cal talked about that once. I heard him talking about just how it was different than shortstop, Then a Bordick could speak to that as well as, when you see these shortstops running full speed, bent over almost at 90-degree angle to get a ball. I always tell people, try that in your front yard someday without a ball or anything. Just try running full speed at that. Which position do you think out there is the one that, people are going to say catchers immediately, but they do have a lot of equipment on. But which position in your mind is the one that invites the most injuries other than pitching, which is dangerous too, as Messina and the balls he took off his face, right?
I still think it's catching. It's particularly tall catchers. We had Charles Johnson and Wieters, they're tremendous arm people, but they were like 6'4", 6'5". And how they can squat down and fold themselves up back there, I think it's just brutal on their knees. And I think it's brutal on their backs because they have to keep their back straight. They have to hold their targets. I just think catcher's far and away the most demanding position. And of course, they have equipment on, and in the heat of the summer, that's got to wear you down wearing these plastic helmets. A lot of the guys are wearing. I've talked to a few catchers who won't wear because they're too hot. And so I still think it's catchers. And then obviously beyond that, it depends who you are. If you're a speed guy and you're stealing bases and you're sliding a lot, that takes a toll on your legs. If you're a speed outfielder, it still amazes me. I know the warning track is slanted to let the outfielders know they're coming to a wall. But if you're going all out for a ball, that's, running into walls isn't good either. But I still think
Jonesy to this day, you talk to, I've talked to Rick Dempsey about this, and I've talked to Jones. And in some ways, I think that Adam's body is hurting more than Rick's after all those years behind the plate because you're running full speed, you're bashing into walls, you're trying to avoid other players, you're diving for balls, you're throwing off balance, to get the ball into the infield as quick as you can. I think when I was on my late 30s, I played in these old man baseball leagues, and it was really fun because occasionally you get to play with a major leaguer and talk to them, right? It was just these guys that could never stop playing baseball. But all of them told them the one that they worried the most about playing when they got older was first base because of the erratic throws from the infield, and you would go up the line to get it, and the guy's coming down the line. Well, then Olerud, who was the only player in Major League history, was allowed to play, as you know, in the field with a cap on to protect his head. We worried about that a lot. Having going up the line and having the ball, have him run into a player, and we've seen those injuries, and those are brutal. But you think catching, huh? Even with the Posey rule out of the way, so
And again, everybody knows Rick Dempsey, and everybody's played golf with him. He's a perfect size to me for a catcher. He's about 5'9", 5'10". He's kind of a little bigger than Yogi Berra. He's got a big, broad chest. He's kind of got short legs. He sits behind the plate very naturally. He's not Matt Wieters at 6'5" with, basketball arms. So again, it's all how you're built. If you look at Pudge Rodriguez, another guy who is even shorter, I think they can sit more comfortably behind the plate. But it still takes wear and tear. I still kind of think that. At first base, to me, the big issue is, you get that throw behind first base and somebody wraps your arm and you dislocate your elbow. That's kind of how I think Roberts hurt his elbow way back when covering first. I think that's a collision thing. I think is less worrisome than getting your arm wrapped around yourself when you reach behind yourself or getting your shoulder subluxed.
One last question I want to ask you along this line too is how hard, because we grew up in the era of the designated hitter, and I always thought that had to be really difficult. Martinez was interviewed a few times about what he did to get loose, and he said he would go down, he'd be running and lifting weights and doing everything he could. So when he came to the plate, he felt like he'd been playing the entire game. It seems to me today with the velocity of these pitchers and the athleticism all around you now, you're at a disadvantage as a DH as opposed to a regular hitter, or not. What do you think?
You'd have to talk to hitters. I mean, everybody has indoor hitting cages now, so they can swing. Certainly, we've all played some level of ball, and I would love to be on the field playing. I think it's harder, but again, if you look at some of the groomed DHs, guys who grew up big power guys, hitters, they probably know themselves are not good fielders. I think in today's world, they're kind of getting used to being DH at such a young age. It's probably not that big a deal from when Blumberg, I think he was the first DH for the Yankees. I think those guys had to figure out how to do it. But I think today the players are so used to it that some of the guys say, I'm going to be a DH. I'm not real good in the field, and I want to just concentrate on it. Remember, we had the catcher, Earl Williams, who said, I remember on the cover of Sport magazine, he said, my position is hitter. And I think more and more of those guys say that if they see themselves as not having defensive skills.
Next week,
I remember Earl Williams, but that was his line. My position is hitter. So.
Well, next week I want to talk to you about the strange world of left-handers, and a little bit. It's interesting. I would have loved to interview at some point, Bill Lee or Fidrich. Some of these guys that I think baseball needs more of, to be honest with you. I think it's great. People love it. They love the kind of quirky ball players, when Ozzie would do a backflip at short or whatever. You just don't see that anymore, and I don't know why, but I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that next week. As always, What's Up, Doc is great. You can catch if you're just watching this and you haven't seen on all of our broadcasts on Bmore Baseball Pod, you can hear Doc talk about a little bit about the injuries too, and also about where the direction the Orioles are headed with some of these injuries too. All right, Doc, always great to see you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Michael Jacobs. I'm Chip Franklin. This is Overtime.
Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.